going to come. Is that true science? It's not science at all. And Malcolm Kendrick says, I'm still waiting for the proof that saturated fat causes heart disease. Let's go back to before the Industrial Revolution, which is the early 1920s. Let's go back and look in the South Pacific Islands. They've been eating coconut oil and coconut every meal for centuries. No heart disease, no strokes, not high blood pressure. Let's have a look at the northern countries in Europe, Norway, Switzerland, Sweden, France, who've mostly got their fats from cows, butter, cream, cheeses, very little heart disease. Let's go to the Mediterranean where they eat a lot of olive oil and have for centuries no heart disease. So when did this heart disease, this high blood pressure, strokes, really start to come in high amounts after the Industrial Revolution? Well, what did they do in the Industrial Revolution? They started to create a lot of chemicals. Chemicals in cleaning products, chemicals in clothes. That's when the nylon, acrylic and polyester created in a chemical laboratory. They started to develop high heat and chemical equipment to be able to extract oil from hard seeds. And what were we told? We were told, stop eating the saturated fat, start eating the polyunsaturated fat. Is that right? Do you know those altered fats, those polyunsaturated fats, are some of the most dangerous because they're damaged oils. And I'm going to show you in a minute what they do in the blood vessel. But let's continue our investigation of what steps have been taken to reduce heart disease. Put everyone on over the age of 50 on aspirin. Has that reduced heart disease? Not at all. But the three main side effects of aspirin are it causes stomach bleeds, so it's a big contributing factor to stomach ulcers, causes brain bleeds, that's deterioration of the brain, causes eye bleeds, causing a deterioration of eyesight. No, it hasn't worked. So number 3, and by the way, has that worked? Not at all, not at all. Okay, everyone that has a heart attack, they're put on the statin drugs. What are statin drugs? Statin drugs are cholesterol-lowering medication. So what I want to look at now is cholesterol. What is it? The liver makes cholesterol, and the liver makes cholesterol according to the body's requirements for cholesterol. And as Dr. Malcolm Kendrick states in his book, The Great Cholesterol Con, he says for the first time, normal levels of a normal vital body substance is being called a disease. That's cholesterol. Now there are 2 main cholesterols in the body. One is low-density lipoprotein, and low-density lipoprotein is called the bad cholesterol. And the other main cholesterol is high-density lipoprotein, or HDL. It's called the good guy. And you know why it's called the good guy? Because it's the carrier of excess cholesterol back to the liver. Well, what's LDL's role? Because it has a purpose. And God doesn't make anything that will hurt us. It has a purpose. LDL cholesterol is the repairer. It's the repairer and the rebuilder. So you're always going to find it where there's a need for rebuilding and repairing. So I'd like to show you in the blood vessel what it does. And because of its low density, LDL is always found on the edge. And because of its high density, HDL is always found in the middle. Can't really see that, so we're going to make it this colour too. I have in my library at home, and all of these books are quoted in my book Sustain Me, in the chapter Love Your Heart with All Your Heart. So these are the titles of some of the books. The Great Cholesterol Con by Dr. Malcolm Kendrick, The Great Vascular Surgeons, and Dr. Dwight Lundell has performed about 10,000 bypasses. And notice the title of his book, The Great Cholesterol Lie. These professionals are blowing the whistle on this myth. And he's not a Dr. Johnny Bowden, but what he is a nutritionist and a personal trainer, fitness guy. His book's called The Great Cholesterol Myth. And Dr. Peter Dingle from Australia, his book's called The Great Cholesterol Deception. There's another book called The Great Cholesterol Hoax. We're running out of names. And so Dr. Natasha Campbell McBride, her book's called Put Your Heart in Your Mouth, because there wasn't another name. And in her book, the Put Your Heart in Your Mouth, she spends the first 3 chapters showing and listing all of the things that break down that arterial wall. So what breaks down that arterial wall? Environmental poisons. And I think you'll agree, even from some of them that we've listed in these classes, there's a lot of them. They're everywhere. And they come into the blood, whether we breathe them in, whether it comes in through our skin, or whether we ingest it. They're coming in, and they're breaking down up the endothelium cells that line the arteries. They're damaging them and breaking them up. Mold. Mold is another one that can do it. Okay, students, who's going to plug up the holes? It's the LDL. So the LDL comes along because that's its job. It's the repairer and the rebuilder. It's coming along to plug up the holes. But the person doesn't realise what's causing the damage. They don't realise the clothes they're wearing, what they're washing their clothes in, what they're eating, what they're breathing in, their personal care products. They don't realise. They don't realise the mouldy bathroom or the mouldy basement, what they're breathing in. And so the damage continues. And what's happening in the arteries? It's building up and up and up and up and up and up and up. Something else is happening. All through the blood, we have little protein molecules. And when a person is on a high carbohydrate diet, yesterday in our class, we looked at an illustration of a high carbohydrate diet. Cereal and toast for breakfast, sandwiches for lunch, pasta for tea, donuts, pretzels, cookies, mid-morning, mid-afternoon. That is a high carbohydrate diet, high sugar diet. And so too much sugar comes into the blood. And what that high sugar does is it connects with these protein molecules. And these little, they're called ages, these little globules and ages, they start sticking on the wall of the artery and they can move. And let's say we've got a very narrow one and one dislodges and it's blocked. If that blockage is in the carotid arteries, that's a stroke. If it's in the heart muscle, that's your cardiac arrest. That's the number 1 cause. But as you can see, it's not one thing that causes heart disease. It's a little bit of this and a little bit of that and a little bit of that, and little by little, they're building up. Let me give you an illustration. I have a friend in Australia. His name's Dr. David Harris, and he's a craniosacral chiropractor. And he's very, very fit. He goes to Europe every year, cycles 200 Ks, loves cycling. He's at this age of his story, which was maybe 7 years ago, he's in his mid-60s. He also plays the panpipes. His ancestry is Scottish. He's vegetarian, plant-based, and he was getting breathless. So a friend of him, a doctor, a cardiologist, said, I want to do an angiogram on you. And he discovered that David's arteries 80% occlusion. Now that illustration there is 80%.
Wow.
Maybe not down there, that's getting to 90%. 80% occlusion, 80% blockage of his artery. 2 of his arteries were 80%. So they rushed him in, gave him 2 bypasses. It's quite a serious operation. They saw the chest bones open. I used to work in operating theatre. I assisted in a bypass one day. Do you know what they do then? They cut that artery out, then they cut one from the leg and then sew it into there. That's what they do. That's a bypass. Closed it up and sent him home. Didn't mention anything about diet. But you know what they did put him on? They put him on the protocol. Have you seen the protocol? No matter who you are, no matter what your age is, no matter what your fitness is, you're given it. It's blood pressure medication, blood thinning medication, and cholesterol lowering medication. Am I right? No matter who you are. So I was talking to him a week later. He said, "Barb, it's genetics." I said, "Genetics loads the gun, Dave. Lifestyle pulls the trigger." So he booked in 2 weeks later to do our health program. And so I was intrigued. You see, I was seeing a man, consulting with him about 10 years ago in Melbourne. I said, "What do you do for a job?" He said, "I'm a private investigator." I said, "So am I." We should all be private investigators, is that right? Because the curse causeless shall not come. Those arteries don't just block up for no reason. That is unscientific. So if ever you're told your health condition is just, it's just you, it's just genetics, you've got every right to say, "Excuse me, but that's very unscientific," because there is a cause. And just because you don't know the cause, it doesn't mean there isn't a cause. So I began to investigate. I said, "Tell me about your childhood, Dave." He said, "Well, I had quite a happy childhood, but my parents both chain smoked." It is estimated there are about 7,000 chemicals in a cigarette now.
Wow.
And you probably have read that passive smoke can be even more dangerous.
Yeah.
So this was in the 50s, 60s, where people just smoked in the kitchen, in the home. You know, there's a few more people are a bit more aware today. So what's happening in the young David's arteries? What's happening is getting little bits of damage. Yeah, from the smoke and you know, his parents didn't know, he didn't know. So I'd like to suggest that by the age of about 15, I wouldn't be surprised if David had about 20% build-up on his arteries. But 20% build-up, the person would hardly know it. You see, the blood is carrying the oxygen, and breathlessness is not the only sign. And someone can have other problems with breathlessness, but it is one of the signs because the blood is the carrier of oxygen. So when you get a restriction of blood flow, you're getting a restriction of oxygen. And then he told me that in 2010, he wanted to put on muscle because he's an athlete. And he was eating what many vegetarians eat. Cereal and toast for breakfast, sandwiches for lunch, pasta for tea, and he loved sugar biscuits. Organic, of course. There's still sugar and it's still wheat. And those little ages are floating round with that high sugar, but something else came into the equation. And he wanted to build up muscle because cereal and toast for breakfast, sandwiches for lunch, pasta for tea, that's almost 100% carbohydrate diet. And I believe it's that diet that has driven many to go to the other extreme, which is the carnivore diet. But we need protein. Remember the 3 essential food groups? Fibre, protein and fats. So he thought he had to stop the fats, so he's hardly having any fats. And his wife doesn't like cooking much, so they're just doing the fast food, which is, we looked at the other day. So he was having very little protein, almost no fats. So he decided to eat tuna every day. Tuna. We had a tuna fisherman do our program. He said we catch 10-foot tuna. See, one of the problems with mercury, there are a few, is it's bioaccumulative. Do you know what that means? The bigger the fish, the more the accumulation of mercury. Now, if you're feeling very sad right now because you love fish, my suggestion is make it a rare treat and go for the smaller, because the smaller the fish, the smaller the accumulation. And so what's happening with the mercury? More damage. So more build-up, more build-up, more build-up, more build-up, more build-up, more build-up. And the ages are certainly there because of his high carbohydrate diet, and they did an angiogram and rushed him in. And when I explained this to David, his eyes were opened. And when I told him about the dangers of cholesterol-lowering medication, he decided to stop the cholesterol medication immediately. I'm very thankful that 10 years ago I was running a retreat in Living Springs in Alabama, and there was a nutritionist. She was 69 and she was still working as a nutritionist. She said, my advantage is that I was in university 40 years ago. And she said 40 years ago, a cholesterol level of 300 was perfectly fine. Did you hear that?
Wow.
Perfectly fine.
Wow.
So you know what they've also done to try and reduce heart disease? They've lowered the levels. They've lowered the levels. Okay. Has that reduced heart disease? Not at all. Not at all. But what's risen, what has risen, is Alzheimer's. And last year I was in Maryland and I was talking to a lady who was 76. She said, I used to be a pathologist and I did all the testing on blood for cholesterol. She said, we considered a cholesterol level of 350 perfectly okay.
Wow.
And what are we told today? You can't go over 190. And if you go over 190, what are you told? You've got to go on some statin drugs. Are you ready for the side effects of the statin drugs? All the cholesterol-lowering medication, Crestor, Lipitor. Muscle wasting, memory loss, Alzheimer's, dementia, and they've just added another one, breast cancer. Because as you saw in our last class, our sex hormones are made from cholesterol.
Wow.
No wonder the good doctors and the good specialists and the good nutritionists have called their books The Great Cholesterol Lie, The Great Cholesterol Con, The Great Cholesterol Deception, The Great Cholesterol Hoax, The Great Cholesterol Myth. They're blowing the whistle. So why do people go on it? Fear. And remember what God said in 2 Timothy 1 verse 7? He said, I've not given you the spirit of fear, but of power. What's power? Knowledge.
Wow.
But of power, love, and a sound mind. You know what a sound mind does? It weighs up the pros and the cons. And on Saturday morning, I'm going to go into the brain and show you where our reason, intellect, and judgment is, where we weigh up the pros and the cons. And that's what we should make our decisions on. The Framingham Heart Study started 40 years ago, little town of Framingham. They set it up to prove that cholesterol causes heart disease. Well, it's 40 years later and it still hasn't done that. Got that? Still hasn't done that. But you know what it showed? That people with high cholesterol levels don't get Alzheimer's. Do you need a moment's silence to digest that? Don't get Alzheimer's because the fattiest organ in the body is the brain. And our brain has 1 trillion of these nerve cells. And you remember yesterday I showed you that the membrane around every nerve cell is 50% fat and 50% protein. But the nerve cell has an arm coming out of it that's covered with a fatty sheath called the myelin sheath. There's another 20% fat. And so the nerve cell, the brain cell, is 70% fat. So when a person's on cholesterol-lowering medication, on a fat-free diet, having fish every day, having a flu injection every year, which has mercury in it, can you see that's a recipe for disaster?
Yeah.
Because that myelin sheath protects the nerve cell. And you know what mercury does? Mercury effectively eats away at that nerve cell. So the mercury fillings in the mouth, the mercury in the fish, the mercury in the flu vaccine, then they're not having the fat, then they're on cholesterol-lowering medication. No wonder the doctors call it the con, the lie, the deception, the hoax, the myth. Remember what Dr. Malcolm Kendrick said? For the first time, normal levels of a normal vital body substance is being called a disease. So what's a good cholesterol level? I'll leave it up to you. Sounds like between 200 and 300 is pretty good. But most people, they are told, you got to go on this medication immediately, or you're a walking, talking heart attack. And you know what you say? Thank you so much for your advice. Take the script. I'm going to seriously consider this. And as you walk out, say, don't call me, I'll call you. Psalm 146 verse 3, put not your trust in princes, neither in the Son of Man, in whom there is no help. Who are the princes? They're the authorities in the field. I believe most doctors are ethical. And I really believe that the doctors should not be trusting the princes in the pharmaceutical company. Because those princes don't tell them the truth. They put too much trust in them. Because what their system is based on deception. It's like the report on a new cancer cure I read in Time magazine. 50% cure, and this new drug that's only going to cost $10,000 a dose. And then I read the fine print. 2 people were tested and 1 died. And it's written by Dr. Dwayne, his name is. And he was an astronaut and a doctor, and he went to have his yearly health test, and his cholesterol level was 200. And the doctor said, bit high, I'll put you on Lipitor. He went on it because he didn't want to have a heart attack and die. 6 weeks later, his wife found him out in the garden. He didn't know who she was, he didn't know who he was. And they'd been together since I was 16. And he's, I think, late 40s. So I stopped the Lipitor. Within 48 hours, his mind was clear. 10 months later, he goes back for his yearly test. His cholesterol level's still 200. Doc says, it's still too high. And the doc's, and the astronaut said, I'm not going back on that. I nearly went mad on that. And the doctor said, it's very rare. Why did the doctor say that? Because that's what the pharmaceutical companies tell him. He said, look, what about half dose? He went on it because he doesn't want to have a heart attack. 6 weeks later, his wife found him out in the garden. He didn't know who she was, didn't know where he was, didn't know who he was. So he wrote he wrote his story and put it up on social media. Do you know, within hours, thousands of hits. Same thing happened to me. Because the side effects are memory loss, muscle wasting, dementia, and Alzheimer's, and now breast cancer. If you are on a cholesterol-lowering medication and you stop tonight, there will be a side effect. Your memory will return. Now, you may be on it for 10 years and you can stop it immediately. I had a couple come to me. I gave a lecture similar to this in New Zealand. This is about 8 years ago. A couple came to me 2 nights later, and they were in their 80s. They said, "Can we please talk to you?" I said, "What is it?" And the man said, "My wife, she's been on Lipitor for 10 years. He said that she was starting to leave the iron on, leave the oven on. He said, I'd wake up in the morning, or in the middle of the night," he said, and she wasn't in bed. I'd go looking for her, and she's in the next door's yard trying to put their clothes on that are on the clothesline. He said, "We were so stressed about it, we can't have our eye on her 24 hours a day." Took her to the doctor. She's got a diagnosis. What's the diagnosis? Dementia. Alzheimer's. If you've been given a title, remember what you say. Thank you so much for your opinion. Got that? Opinion. I'm going to seriously consider this. You don't need to take it on. He said, we've booked her into an aged care facility. He said, "We don't want to do that. We didn't want to do that, but we didn't know what else to do." He said, "We came to your lecture on Tuesday night. We heard about the Lipitor. We took her off immediately." And he looked at me and he had tears in his eyes. He said, "We've got my wife back. Wow. We're not going to put her in the aged care facility." And I looked at her and she smiled and nodded. See, her mind was already coming back. How many are in aged care facilities diagnosed with Alzheimer's, dementia, and it's because of the medication they're on? But it's not just the medication, it's usually because they're also dehydrated. It's usually also because of the dehydrating effect of the other medication. It can be a whole lot of things. A whole lot of things. But we have the opportunity to never get Alzheimer's. We have the opportunity to prevent that. That is the good news. So let's go back and continue looking at what medicine has done to actually reduce heart disease. And has any of that worked? No, it hasn't worked at all. And what's the definition of insanity? It's to do what you've always done and expect different results. And so, can you clear that out? Well, Dr. Agatha Thrash and her husband, Dr. Calvin Thrash, they started a health retreat called Uchee Pines. I think it's in Georgia. They're still running. They're both past now. If they were still alive, they'd probably be over 100. And she gave the story. I met her about 25 years ago. And she used to give the story that a lady came to their retreat to do a week's program, and she was an alcoholic, and she just had an angiogram, and she had 80% occlusion of 2 main arteries, but they didn't want to operate on her because of her age, and also because of her alcoholism. They knew that her tissues were weakened. So her family booked her into the health retreat. She wasn't very happy because there was no alcohol in the health retreat. And there were no cigarettes and there was no caffeine. But the staff were so lovely. And she had juices and they eased her through the difficult days. By the 3rd day, she felt really good. Really good. And they had her on cayenne pepper, which helps to clear the arteries. They had her on a few herbs. I can't tell you exactly what they had her on, but they had her on some herbs that helped to clear it out, which I'll go through in a minute. Ginger and garlic are a couple of others. She started to walk every day. Do you know, On about day 4, with her mind so much clearer and her feeling so good, she started to read the Bible that was in her room. She started at Matthew, Mark, Luke and John, the stories of Jesus, and she fell in love with Jesus. Her mind was clear and she surrendered her life to God.
That's good.
And by the end of the week, she had a new lease on life. She felt so good. How quickly does the body respond when given the right conditions?
Yeah.
And she said to Agatha, "Do I have to leave? Can I stay?" Agatha said, "We'll see what we can do." And they found a little room she could stay in, and I think she'd help with the laundry. But the next 10 months were, I think, the best years of her life. But unfortunately, an embolism in her brain burst and she died instantly. And Agatha, as a medical doctor, did a post-mortem on her and her arteries were clear. Now, I'm very thankful for that story because unless a person, unless they do an angiogram, how do they know if the arteries were clear? Do you know the signs that the arteries are clear are the way you feel? That was 10 months on a woman in her late 70s, late 70s, early 80s, on an alcoholic whose tissues were weakened by her many years of alcoholism. And when Agatha did the post-mortem, the arteries were clear, from 80% occlusion.
Wow.
I was talking to two women that did our program, young women in their mid-20s. They said, "We're nutritionists," and they said, "We were told that can never happen." Do you know, I never say never. Except in one area, drugs never cure disease. It's the body and the body only that can heal disease. So how can we clean those arteries out? How did this lady do it? It really was the Sustain Me principles. And the Sustain Me principles we looked at briefly yesterday in relation to diabetes. And I want to look at them now in relation to heart. The cells that line the arterial walls, in their very nucleus is the DNA, and there are 2,500 receptor sites on the DNA for vitamin D. And vitamin D is essential for the assimilation of calcium coming into the body. Calcium's called the king because when calcium gets in, it brings in all the minerals. And the highest source of minerals in dark green leafy vegetables, but also in salt. And what do the princes tell us about salt? There's salt and there's salt. In seawater, there are 92 minerals. In fact, seawater is called an isotonic solution because it is the exact same mineral balance and proportion as is found in the body. In fact, Dr. Jacques de Langry, who wrote the book Sea Salt's Hidden Power, he calls our internal fluids our internal ocean. And every time you urinate, go to the bathroom, sweat, cry, we're losing minerals. We're losing minerals. Our perspiration, we lose minerals, and we need to replace them. And the best way to replace them is to take them in the way God made them, which is in that balance. Now, of those 92 minerals, 30% is sodium and 50% is chloride. So what man does, the princes, some of the princes, they scoop the sodium chloride up, haven't got time to wait for the rest, bleach it white, put aluminium with it, so it runs freely. There's your table salt. The doctor is right. Table salt will cause a rise in blood pressure because it's bringing an imbalance in and out of the cell. That causes pressure. Dr. Jacques de Langry, he's passed now, But he said if he gets a patient with high blood pressure, he puts them on the Celtic salt, because the Celtic salt, it contains 82 minerals, whereas the other 10, they're in such pico proportion. Pico is a measurement that's barely measurable. It's inevitable that some are lost, but hey, 82 is a lot closer to 92 than 2. So we need minerals, but we need the vitamin D to be able to get the calcium to bring those minerals in. How do we get vitamin D? Half an hour in the sun, please, nothing on your skin. Nothing on the skin. Half an hour in the sun, 50 minutes front, 50 minutes back, will give you 20,000 international units of vitamin D. But if you wash your body with soap before you lay in the sun, you won't get any. Because the ultraviolet rays from the sun hit the skin and convert a form of cholesterol. Did everyone hear that? If your cholesterol levels are too low, you're not going to get vitamin D. So rather than preventing heart attacks, cholesterol-lowering medication can actually contribute to heart attacks. And if you lay it in the sun, get hot and sweaty, jump in the shower and wash it all off with lots of soap, you're not going to get vitamin D, because it takes about 2 hours once you've been in the sun for that skin to process that vitamin D. But if you dive in the lake or dive in the creek or dive in the sea, you won't lose your vitamin D because you're not washing the oils off with soap. Use of water. The best blood thinner in the world is water. How do I know that? I used to do a live blood analysis at Misty Mountain, and the blood jumps around like this. And very rarely, but occasionally, I'd do a live blood analysis and see this. And I'd say to the person, have you had any water to drink today? And you know what the answer was? No. And they would drink water, and the next day I'd take their blood and it looked like that. So how simple is that? Best blood thinner is just water. But taken in little by little, we need to be drinking 8 lots of 8 glasses a day. Start early. Take that little crystal of Celtic salt, about a sesame seed, before each glass. And all you will do is replace the minerals you lost yesterday. Our heart needs to sleep at night. Yes, it'll keep going, but at a lot slower rate, which allows it to be restored and revived. But we need 8 hours a night. Trust in God. Trusting God takes into consideration all the emotional and mental aspects of disease. That's stress. Do you know, the old saying says, worry is blind and cannot discern the future. Isn't that true? What can you do? I was telling Jacqueline about a story. This is 10 years ago. I was staying in Washington State doing lectures at night, and they gave me a beautiful house to stay in. Apparently the owners of the house were on holiday somewhere. Beautiful big 2-story house. And in the morning, after breakfast, I went and sat in the sun, and the door behind me shut, and I went up. It was locked. My phone's in there. My purse is in there. I don't know where I am. I don't even know the name of the people that dropped me off there. It was at night. What are you going to do? I'm just glad I didn't have my nightie on. I'm glad I had at least. But it's in an inhale, and it has an incredible effect to actually calm us. It's just the deep breathing. Abstain. And I'm just going to let you guess what are some disastrous things for the heart. You can hear it starts with C. Yep, it's that caffeine. Why? Why is it no good for your heart? It's because when a person has a cup of coffee, they've created a crisis in the body. And that crisis causes the blood pressure to go up. Because in a crisis, you're about to do the run or the climb or the fight of your life. So blood pressure rises so that you're moving faster. And the person's just sitting in the coffee shop. So there are some things that must stop. And yes, caffeine is one of them. Caffeine, and look at all the things that damage the arterial wall, the cheap oils that have been extracted using high heat and chemical equipment. What they do is they cause damage to those arterial walls. And remember, telling people to go on the fat-free, low-fat diet, going on the margarine, another altered dangerous fat, that has not reduced heart disease at all, but it certainly has increased Alzheimer's and dementia. How this is a lung, and the trachea splits, and then you've got all these little bronchioles, and at the end of every bronchiole, there's what looks like a little bunch of grapes. And let me magnify that for you. Looks like this. And we have about 300 million of those alveoli in our lungs. And that's where the gaseous exchange takes place. So let me show you how this happens, because it's quite fascinating. So we're going to, we've already got a red. So over that little alveoli is the blood vessel. That's supposed to be red. Oh, there's a bit of red coming. And in that blood vessel, you've got carbon dioxide, because it's the waste product coming from the combustion of oxygen and glucose in the cell. So the carbon dioxide comes in the blood. We breathe in the air, and there's a gaseous exchange. With that gaseous exchange, there's the blood vessel. If you've got 4 molecules of carbon dioxide, then your blood can pick up 4 molecules of oxygen. But if you've only got 2 molecules of carbon dioxide, then your blood can only pick up 2 molecules of oxygen. And if you breathe in through your nose and out through your mouth, you will lose too much carbon dioxide. So we should be breathing in and out through our nose. The hardest times when you're exercising, I'm sure you tried it this morning when you're running up the hill, is that right? Sorry? It's the hardest time, but you can train yourself into it. So breathing in and out through the nose raises your carbon dioxide levels, because if you breathe out through your mouth, you lose too much carbon dioxide. Was anyone brave enough to sleep with their mouth taped up last night? Don't see any hands. To raise the carbon dioxide levels in your blood, because more carbon dioxide in the blood means more oxygen. And do you remember we looked at the cell? And we looked at the cell, and the glucose goes in, and remember the first pathway that has no oxygen, 2 units of energy. The second pathway that has oxygen, 36 units of energy. What a difference oxygen makes. And you can get more oxygen in your cell by getting more oxygen in your blood, which is going to carry it to the cell by breathing only in and out through the nose. There's more. They discovered that the cells that are used mostly in exercise, which would be the quads, I'm sure when you did your squats this morning, your quads. So your quads, and maybe your calf muscles, especially if you're walking or exercise bike, they found that the muscles used mostly in exercise are getting more oxygen in there than the cells that aren't used in exercise. Why? Because they're giving off more carbon dioxide. And that gaseous exchange, as it happens in the alveoli in the lung, is also happening at the cell. So when there are 4 molecules of carbon dioxide coming out of that cell, 4 molecules of oxygen can get in. It's a gaseous exchange. And when you breathe in and out through your nose, you're maintaining correct carbon dioxide levels. It is true, you can have too much carbon dioxide, but you can also have not enough carbon dioxide. So breathing in and out through the nose not only raises oxygen levels by raising carbon dioxide, but that carbon dioxide has a vasodilator effect. So if you find someone who's got an irregular heartbeat, if you find someone seems to be having a heart attack, one of the best things you can do is to ask them very politely to close their mouth and breathe in and out through the nose. And what that will automatically do is raise their carbon dioxide levels, and carbon dioxide is a vasodilator, opens the blood vessels. When you breathe in and out through your nose, that the sinuses release nitric oxide. Nitric oxide is an agent that is antimicrobial, antibacterial, but it is also a vasodilator. So 2 gases are released that cause vasodilation when you breathe in and out through your nose. That makes it even more attractive. And cayenne pepper is a vasodilator. Cayenne pepper is a blood thinner. Do you know there's no need for rat poison, I mean warfarin. Do you know that's what it is? They don't give humans as much compared to their size as rats, of course. But I've met people on warfarin and the blood is dripping out of their nose. And every time they brush their hand, they're bruising. So I say to them, I have no authority over your medication and I can't tell you what to do, but I can tell you what I would do. So for someone on warfarin, they can start taking 2 capsules of cayenne pepper 3 times a day. That's a very high dose. In the book, Jethro Kloss's book, Back to Eden, he devotes half a page to every herb, 10 pages to cayenne pepper.
Yep.
Now this man, his eyes were opened in the area of health when he read that little book, Ministry of Healing, probably in the early 1900s. And he got interested in health. He also became a Christian and he started studying herbs and he wrote the book Back to Eden by Jethro Kloss. That's his name, Jethro Kloss. 10 pages to cayenne pepper. 2 doctors are quoted in his paper. His 10 pages on cayenne pepper. One doctor says it's impossible to abuse cayenne pepper. The other doctor says it'll never cause a lesion, it'll never cause a wound or a sore or a burn. Impossible to abuse cayenne pepper. Do you know what that means? You could have a bucket a day and it won't hurt you. But I don't know anyone that has a bucket a day. And if someone says 2 capsules of cayenne pepper 3 times a day, is that safe? Has anyone asked if the warfarin's safe? If the statin drugs are safe? You could take a bucket a day and it won't hurt you. No one does that. I give that as an illustration to show this cannot harm you. If you find it a little hard on an empty stomach, don't take it on an empty stomach. Take it with food. And if 2 capsules 3 times a day is too much, we'll go to 1 capsule 3 times a day and build up to it. You're the doctor, listen. But remember, it will never cause a lesion or a burn. There's a medical journalist named Sam Bizer, and he's written a book, Curing with Caffeine. And when you read that book, you'll think it's a cure-all, and it just about is. It's almost the first aid kit in one. Cayenne pepper thins the blood. Cayenne pepper is a vasodilator. It opens the blood vessels. Cayenne pepper can repair and rebuild arterial walls. What an amazing herb. An amazing herb. Legumes, chickpeas, lima beans, black eye beans, nuts, seeds, incorporate them every meal. How many people don't eat nuts for a month and then buy a packet and eat the whole lot, not in the afternoon? And unfortunately, Jacqueline was working in a health food shop one day and there was nothing to eat and she was working all day, so she just ate a whole pound of nuts. And then the next day when she ate one nut, big reaction, she developed an allergy. That would be very sad to have an allergy to nuts. She can eat them now, but only a little. And her body tells her if she's overdone it. So a good idea is to have 8 to 10 nuts per meal. That's a nice amount. So what you do is you get the nuts out of the jar, put the lid on, put it back in the cupboard, shut the door, put the padlock on. Because they are very nice and we can tend to overeat them. And I trust that I've proven to you that fat is not the problem. The only fat that's the problem is those really cheap oils that have been extracted using high heat and chemicals from the hard seeds. Moderation in all the good things. We just described the importance of moderation in, yes, delicious things like nuts. And the last one is exercise. And I've read several books, and I think I have to go back this way. I've read several books by doctors who've used exercise to strengthen their heart patient's heart. And they have discovered that the high-intensity interval training is the most powerful form of exercise for the heart. We touched on it last night, and I want to go into a little bit more detail. So the high intensity can be anything that gets the heart rate up. We've got a really good hill where I'm staying at the moment, and walking up there really gets the heart rate up. Usually for 30 seconds. And recovery, look at 2 minutes, and then do this for a cycle. Dr. Doug McGuff, who was looking at this for his heart patients, this is what the regime that he started with for a cycle of 6. That's about 15 minutes a day. But what I'm very thankful to Doug McGuff is he goes inside the cell, and that's what I want to show you now. We're going to go inside the cell and have a look at why this is such an effective way to strengthen the heart. So the glucose goes in, it goes through a 20-step pathway. You know this one off by heart by now, is that right? Gives us 2 units of energy. The end result is a chemical form of glucose called pyruvate, which gets fed into the 8-step pathway called the powerhouse of the cell, because it'll give us 36 units of energy, and the difference is oxygen. This one, no oxygen. Then we've got our glycogen stores. Remember the quick release glucose stores that are already sitting in our muscle cells that I'm sure you used up on your morning walk this morning. And then any excess glucose gets stored as fat. These are our basement stores. But what I want to show you is what happens with this whole process with the high intensity interval training. Now this is a very fast pathway. We've looked at that a few times. This one here is slow. So when you do the high intensity interval training, so that could be walking up a steep hill or running or on the exercise bike or push-ups or squats, doing 30 squats in a row will really get it up. rowing machine, whatever it is, something that'll get that heart rate up and the respiration increased. When you do the high intensity, the 20-step pathway speeds up and the 8-step pathway speeds up. That's not a surprise. But there's a rate-setting enzyme in there that will always keep this one faster and this one slower. So what the body does, that excess pyruvate that's made, it stores it as lactic acid. You've heard of lactic acid? Now the beauty of the high intensity interval training, it has a few things. Yesterday we looked at how the high intensity can cause extra receptor sites for insulin to develop on the cell wall. Now I want to show you what else it does. In recovery time, that lactic acid is converted back to pyruvate. Do you know what that means? When you're in recovery time might be just doing some gentle stretches. They've discovered that recovery time, if you're doing something a bit gentler, is better than just doing nothing. So often Michael and I in the rainforest was when we walk downhill, we're in recovery, and run up the hill. When you're in recovery time, this lactic acid is converted back to pyruvate, then fed into the powerhouse. So when you're in recovery time, you're burning just as much fuel as when you're running as fast as you can. But what also is happening is the lactic acid is being mopped up. And that's why trainers today are training their athletes all in the high intensity interval training. And we're training for something far more important than the Olympic Games. We're training for life. I want to enjoy my latter years. And how many people today, the last 20 years of their life, are miserable? I don't want that. And there's no need to be that. 15 minutes. If you haven't got 15 minutes, it's time to assess what you do with your time. Remember Ecclesiastes chapter 3, to every time there is a season. There's a time for every purpose under heaven. There is a time in your day for exercise. You just got to find it. Live for 24 hours. What a bargain. Yeah. The human growth hormone causes a release of hormone-sensitive lipase, and that hormone-sensitive lipase starts to break down the fat stores. What's also happening is the human growth hormone causes the body to stop burning glucose as fuel and become a fat burner. Now the reason it becomes a fat burner is because glucose burns at 4 calories per gram and fat burns at 9 calories per gram. Now every weight loss book has this in psychedelic colours as the proof as to why you shouldn't eat fat if you want to lose weight, but they don't understand what a calorie is. A calorie is a unit of energy. And if you want a high energy food, what do you eat? It's a bit hard to say, isn't it? We've been so brainwashed on fat. Utilise that protein. Also, the human growth hormone increases the circulation of the blood to the skin. No wonder the movie stars pay $1,000 for this. Their business is dependent on them looking good. Their business is dependent on slowing down the wrinkles coming. Yes, the wrinkles will come. But in many people, they're coming too soon. And one of the biggest articles that ages, especially women, very quickly is caffeine. Have I convinced you yet? Increases the circulation of the blood to the skin. Are you starting to see that everything we need, we've got? We've got inside of us. We just need to know how to access it, which I trust I have shown you. The life of the flesh is in the blood. The life is the blood. So we keep the heart with all diligence by implementing the sustain me principles, and we keep the blood strong, we keep it thin, we keep it, remember what it's carrying? Oxygen. Inhale through the nose so you ensure you've got adequate oxygen. It carries the nutrient, have the best quality food you can get, high fibre, generous protein, great fats, because the blood carries the nutrition to every cell. And drink adequate water because the blood is the carrier of the water. So the blood is the life of the flesh if we're breathing through our nose, eating nourishing food and drinking adequate water. Hawthorn berry. And the hawthorn berry is a heart strengthening herb. The hawthorn berry has the ability to even bring back into balance the heartbeat in a condition like heart arrhythmia. The hawthorn berry is a very safe herb. You can take large amounts. You can even take 4,000 to 5,000 milligrams a day. And I have seen many people get off their blood pressure medication. I trust you've seen you can stop the cholesterol-lowering medication immediately. You can stop the blood thinning medication immediately, but please drink 8 glasses of water a day. And you can also start reducing the blood pressure medication by implementing the hawthorn berry, but at the same time, must go to bed early, must drink adequate water, must exercise every day. And that will reduce the heart disease. That will reduce the high blood pressure. That is the answer to heart disease. But as you can see, there aren't any multinationals that can make any money out of this. They're the simple methods that God gave us to bring about healing in the body. So please, I ask you to keep the heart with all diligence, because out of it are the issues of life. We'll have some questions now.